is Bean to Barstool, a podcast that looks at the intersections of craft beer and craft chocolate. My name is David Nilsson. I'm a professional beer writer and an advanced cicerone, and the creator and host of this show. The music for this episode is by my dear friend, indie folk musician Anna P.S. You can find out more about Anna's music in the show notes or at her website, annapsmusic.com. You can find links and information about our guests in the show notes as well. I hope you enjoy this episode of Bean to Barstool. I love beer flights. One of the things that makes craft beer so much fun is its sheer variety of styles, interpretations of those styles, and ways of using those styles for flavor experimentation. A flight is an opportunity to explore. A flight board might have an Abbey Dubbel, a Munich Dunkel, an ESB, and a Biere de Garde, taking you on a sensory trip to Belgium, Germany, England, and France, a few ounces of beer at a time. It might have IPAs with different hops in them so you can experience their slightly different sensory qualities. It's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to celebrate with your senses. Flights, however, are not without their critics. Pouring a flight board is more work for bartending staff than pouring a single pint, and it means more glasses to wash after a guest is done. It slows down service during busy periods. And many brewers feel a 4 or 5 ounce flight glass isn't enough beer for a drinker to fully appreciate what they've created. And they might be right, but in that case, is a pint enough? Is a 6-pack? Surely the more of a beer we have, the better we'll come to understand it and the brewer's intent, but that doesn't mean we can't appreciate what a brewer has achieved, or, let's be honest, sometimes failed to achieve, in just a few ounces. I lead beer training for a prominent brewery in my area. If you work in beer, get in touch to talk about similar options for your brewery. And when we're talking about beer service, I always touch on flights. I know a customer ordering a flight might be frustrating for a bartender because of the extra work, but I tell them to recognize what a flight order represents. It means a customer is curious and is here for an experience. They aren't just having a beer after work or meeting a friend who likes this place, both perfectly valid ways of enjoying beer, of course. They're here because maybe they want to try new things, or they've heard about your brewery and want to get a sample of what you do best, or because they're on a beer trip and are making a series of brewery stops. They're curious, and they're telling you they're here to taste your beer. That's an opportunity both for the bartender or server and for the brewery. By all means, limit flight service to off-peak hours, but don't eliminate it. Flights represent curiosity and excitement and joy, all qualities craft beer needs right now as it weathers its current market challenges. Why am I talking about flights? Because today we're talking with the king of beer flights, Joel Geier. Joel runs the Brewery Travels Instagram and Twitter accounts. That's brewery_travels. I'll link to it in the show notes. And most importantly, he's the author of the new book, Flights Across America, A Brewery Lover's Journey, chronicling his beer adventures to over 1,300 breweries across all 50 states. That's an incredible number, meaning Joel has probably visited 1 in every 6 or 7 breweries in the entire country. And at as many of those breweries as allow it, he's ordered a flight. In the book, Joel gives tips on beer travel, provides hundreds of brewery recommendations, and reminds us how much fun beer is supposed to be. Joel and I have followed each other on social media for years, and I appeared on his podcast a couple years ago to discuss the beer scene here in Dayton, Ohio, and we finally met in person during the Great American Beer Festival in Denver back in 2022. We sat at the bar at Our Mutual Friend, an excellent brewery in the Rhino neighborhood of Denver, full of great breweries, and it was great to taste beers side by side. Our mutual favorite beer was Saison Trastero, with its subtle lemon drop acidity, hints of florality, and some musty attic notes. 2 days later, the beer won gold in the Brett Beer category at GABF, adding a touch of glamour to the memory of enjoying that beer together. Joel is an unapologetic beer enthusiast. He loves beer and breweries and the kinds of experiences that form the foundation of beer geekery here in the U.S., and I say that with all affection. Working as a beer writer, it can sometimes feel like the entire industry is jaded right now, and I understand why. This is not an easy time to be running a brewery. 2024 was the first year in over 2 decades that more breweries closed in the US than opened. I worry for my friends in the industry, and I myself can struggle with discouragement, like the game is almost up. There are plenty of attention grabbing headlines right now trying to convince us of exactly that. But as my insightful colleague Dave Infante outlined in a recent piece for VinePair, craft beer will be fine. It experienced years of exceptional growth, which was always going to be unsustainable. But this isn't last call. Support the breweries you love, but don't panic. And I say that for myself as much as for anyone else. I'm susceptible to taking on the feeling of the space I'm living and working in. I worry. I deal with anxiety, as I've written about previously. As a beer writer, I have felt my enthusiasm overtaken of late by the pallor that hangs over much of the industry. Books like Flights Across America and conversations like the one I'm sharing today with Joel, its author, are a helpful reminder of how much fun craft beer can be. The world of flavor and experience and camaraderie is still out there, waiting for us to go exploring. So let's jump in. Here's my conversation with Joel Geier, author of Flights Across America, A Brewery Lover's Journey. Joel, first off, congratulations on the release of your book, Flights Across America. I'm excited today to talk all about your journeys around the country, tasting beer in every state. And the first question I have for you, I've been following you on social media and we've known each other for a while. You are prolific in your brewery adventuring. You've been to well over 1,000 breweries and tried thousands and thousands of beers. How do you keep track of your information? So when it comes to a project like doing this book, you actually have that at your fingertips. Do you have massive spreadsheets? Like, what are you doing to track all
Yeah,
this?
I mean, I've got kind of some of everything. I do definitely have the spreadsheets. I started those. I started keeping the list, around like 20 breweries or so, and then I was kind of like, okay, I need to keep better track of this. And so I had spreadsheets, and now the spreadsheet has different tabs for each state. And I record, my favorite beers, rankings, all that kind of stuff. But the way I really do it is that since brewery number 52, or is it 56? Somewhere in the 50s was I started taking handwritten notes at every brewery. And I did that. My father and I went out to, I think it was like 4 breweries in St. Paul. They live up by the Twin Cities. And that was the first time I'd ever gone to that many in one day. And I had a flight at each of them. And I took pictures, obviously, but not all of them are, clearly labeled. And you get home and it's like, oh, like there's 16 beers here to remember. That's quite a bit. And so I went out and bought like a portfolio, like a small little portfolio thing that holds the little notepads. And I've swapped out that notepads more times than I can count at this point. But yeah, so I have handwritten notes for all my brewery visits, which did come in handy. I didn't start writing the notes because of the book, but I did it more for the social media and being able to track it for my own sake. But it did come in handy when did come time to write the book, to have all those notes and being able to pull back, the social media posts easily and all that kind of good stuff. So, yeah, it's a little bit nerdy to be taking notes at a bar, but I feel, and I know that you may have the same experience too. It's a good way to start a conversation with folks because, especially if they aren't too busy, they're going to be interested in why someone's sitting at the bar taking notes on the beer.
Yeah, for sure. No, we're in the same boat there. I've got a little notebook that I keep in my camera bag and take with me everywhere. My wife years ago found waterproof
Oh
notebooks that are
yeah.
for I think they're for birding, actually, for people who are going to
Yeah.
be outdoors. But you can spill something on them and wipe it right off, and
That's
it doesn't cause
brilliant.
any
See, I,
problems.
I I haven't done it that way, and that probably would be, a good way to do it.
Yeah, they're great. But I've gone through so many of those now. Now, do you end up digitizing those notes, or do you just go back and
Not the
reference?
full notes, not the full notes. And I guess in some ways I digitize them in the fact of, on Instagram, and like I post about them on Twitter and everything. And I do like, I just record on the spreadsheets. I pretty much just record the brewery, what city I'm in, what my favorite beer was there, what style of beer that was. And then I have my scores for, the brewery, the tap room, all that kind of stuff. But otherwise, yeah, I've kept all my notes. So, as long as I can search and figure out what number brewery it was, I can go back and find my notes for just about any brewery at this point. So,
What number brewery are you on now?
1367. It'll slowing down here a little bit as we're home more permanently with my daughter in school, but I'll be hopefully getting to some more here, coming up soon. And yeah, it's something I've enjoyed doing, but at the same time, it's good timing for the book to be out. Now that we're kind of slowing down and allowing me to focus on that some more.
Yeah, for sure. Well, tell us a little bit about the way that your life has afforded you the opportunity to do this. Like, why have you been able to get out and go to 1,300 breweries?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's all because of my wife who hates beer. But my wife is solely responsible for this. Before we had kids, we were both in grad school here in Milwaukee. I had been visiting breweries. I had kind of started this, little bit of a hobby. And she had some travel nurses come to work. She was working as a nurse at that point. And for, people that may not know, travel nurses are essentially nurses that work under, they get 3-month contracts approximately to go work at different facilities in desperate need of nurses around the country.
Hmm.
And so we did that for a year. Then we got pregnant and had our first daughter. We were home. We both finished grad school, had our son in early 2021. And throughout that time, we had discussed the possibility of traveling again because we missed it. We didn't throughout most of that. We didn't think we were actually going to because like we have kids now, we're not going to go travel. And then we just started talking about it more and more. And my wife and I are known for doing some crazy stuff, and that was definitely a crazy choice to make. But we went back on the road with a toddler and newborn baby. I think it was like 3 months after my son was born. We were back living on the road again. She took 2 travel nurse jobs and then she had finished her doctorate. So she transitioned to working as a psychiatric nurse practitioner, but fully remote. And that enabled us even more freedom to go and like live in these places. And we had more control over timing and location. And, we weren't having to find housing next, while trying to factor in hospitals and all that kind of good stuff. And so, yeah, we've lived in, I believe, 14 states since we got married 9.5 years ago. And it was within 8.5 years because we've been home now for the last year. But yeah, so that is definitely the reason behind all of this, because getting to live somewhere for a few months, it's more than just, a touristy quick pop in and out. You're actually getting to live and immerse yourself in those cities, beer and otherwise. And then you're also getting to explore the whole region. We would be taking weekend trips to other cities, within a couple hours. And that gave me this opportunity to share my experiences. And that's when, the first time around, especially, that's when my Twitter account kind of bumped up a little bit. And because people enjoyed following, those travels. And that led us to here, and the fact that we were able to pull off the 50 state thing, getting to Hawaii and Alaska this year, because those were the last 2 ones. And yeah, so I guess I'm just really lucky is the gist of that story.
Sure. No, I think that is cool that you're able to spend a little bit more time, because I think we've all rolled our eyes before at the person who spends 2 days in a city and then writes a
Yep.
tour guide for everybody to
Yep.
go check it out. So you have a little bit more insider knowledge there. What have been the cities that have surprised you the most that maybe you weren't, everybody knows Asheville or
Yep.
Grand Rapids or San Diego. What have been the ones that have really surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, there's several because I mean, as you know, at this point, just about everywhere has great craft beer that you can find, but there are a few that certainly stick out. Um, I would say Bismarck, North Dakota is one that I've always been telling people. I went to 3 breweries. I think they only have 4 or 5 in the city, but I went to 3 breweries and they were all really good. And one in particular, right downtown, Gideon's Brewing, was just phenomenal across the board. My entire flight was awesome.
Hmm.
Their Hefeweizen in particular was very well done. Um, I've always said Duluth, Minnesota is another one that I like to point out. Charleston, West Virginia. Again, that's another one that only has like I think 4, maybe 5 breweries. But I went to 3, and they were within like a block and a half of each other, right downtown, and they all had some good stuff. 2 in particular were very very good. Fife Street and Short Story, very very good beer there. I would throw Birmingham, Alabama. I would say is certainly another good option. I used to say Missoula, but I feel like Missoula is starting to get a little bit more like a few more people know about Missoula at this point. Montana as a whole, Bozeman, like the craft beer scene in Montana as a whole is really underrated. Yeah, I mean there's so many. Spokane is great. There's really good. I mean, I could list
Right.
breweries for just about anywhere, but those are some of like the smaller cities, and in particular in states that you don't think of for craft beer. The West Virginia, the North Dakota, the Alabama that you're not thinking about for craft beer, but that truly do have some really good local breweries producing great stuff there.
Yeah, so you mentioned those ones. Were there other states where at the state level you felt like there was a lot more that they offered than people expect?
Yeah, well, I mean, one is certainly Utah. I think people hear Utah and they immediately think about the restrictive beer laws, and that, the 5% where you can't serve beer on tap over 5%, or I don't know if it's still 5 or if they moved it up a little bit more. But when I've been there 2 different times. And the first time I was there, it was 4%. And the second time I was there was 5%. You can get any ABV to go in bottles, but they're only able to produce beer to serve in their tap room at 5% or less. And I was very impressed with the depth and quality of styles at some of these places that they were able to achieve, even with those constraints. Templin Family, just south of downtown Salt Lake City, was an absolutely incredible brewery. To put them anywhere and they would measure up. Very, very good stuff. I would say I've been surprised with some of the breweries in Nebraska is one I would say I would throw in there. And I'm trying to think if what else, South Carolina, I think that'd be my other one too. Charleston's got a really good beer scene. Arguably my favorite brewery in the state is in Columbia Craft Brewery. And Greenville's got a really nice emerging beer scene too. So
Cool.
those would be a couple of my examples for that.
Awesome. Well, you've mentioned flights several times, and I'd love to take a few minutes to talk about that because flights can be kind of divisive in the
Oh yeah.
craft beer space. You and I are huge fans of flights,
Yep.
but they catch some flack from folks for various reasons. One of them being obviously they slow things down a little bit
Oh yeah.
at the bar. But let's talk about flights. What do you love about being able to order a flight at a brewery?
Yeah, well, I mean, it certainly is. I mean, that's the whole title of my book. A majority of the pictures in the back of the book are of my favorite flight boards and flights from around the country. I know you and we both had flights, and I was just remembering it was the Saison Trastero that was both of our
Mhm.
favorites, and then like I think it was the next like night or two, it won either a gold or silver at GABF.
Yeah,
The
that
fall,
was
yeah,
our
right
mutual
away.
friend.
So yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
our mutual friend. So with flights, the thing with me is that I'm visiting most breweries one time. In most cases, I'm either passing through town or even if I'm living there, I'm trying to get to all the different breweries. So there's been a couple instances where I've made different like I've made return trips, but overall, comparing it to the full pours, which is obviously what most people talk about when discussing the comparison to enjoying a beer and letting the beer getting a full experience. I would prefer to be able to get maybe it's not quite the same level of depth with a beer, getting it in a flight, but I would prefer to get a better depth of the brewery as a whole. And the flight enables me to do that. I am able to, get a variety of styles. Most breweries, it's a variety of styles. Something light, something dark, something hoppy, a wild card, or, asking what the brewery is best known for, flagships. Occasionally it's also, there are breweries that specialize, but even then getting to try more than one of that style at a brewery is I feel very important if you want to write about it. So yeah, I mean, I've obviously been to, breweries that either don't offer flights or just do half pours, or maybe they offer flights but don't offer them on the weekends. Because it is, I mean, there certainly is. It's more work for the staff. It's more glassware to clean. It slows things down. But I do talk about because I compare in my book, the whole how-to guide kind of at the beginning of the book. That's one of the things I talk about are the different pour styles that people will encounter when they're out and about, primarily flights, the different types of flights and, half pours, full pours, what kind of the pros and cons are for each one. And for me, I've just always enjoyed, I've always loved getting to try more than one beer at a brewery. And if you go and order a pint, if you're wanting to visit more than one brewery, you can't really do more than one of those. So even if you're getting a lower ABV, so that's just always been my take on it. I fully appreciate. I have another beer traveler friend that he really only does pints at 95 or more % of the breweries he visits. But for me, flights have just always been the
Yeah.
way. I've enjoyed getting to go and getting to experience more of the beers. Because even if you get a flight, most of the time you're trying maybe 25% of the beers, sometimes even less, that the brewery has on tap. So yeah, just doing my best to get a full encompassing look at what that brewery.
We'll be right back.
Getting a Cicerone certification can be a game changer for your beer career, but how are you supposed to find the time to prep, and how do you know what and how much to study? When I was preparing for my Cicerone certification, I used the Beer Scholars study guides. The Beer Scholar currently offers efficient online courses for levels 1 and 2 of the Cicerone program that cover everything you need to know and contain tips and tricks for how to pass the exams, and include live weekly Zooms to taste and discuss classic beer styles together. They even have a new coaching program for level 3, Advanced Cicerone, that I really wish had been around when I was preparing for that exam. The majority of certified Cicerones in the world today have used Beer Scholar to help achieve their goals. If you're ready to level up your beer career, visit thebeerscholar.com to check out their online courses. I'll link to that in the show notes. Now, back to our episode. I think another part of it too, for me, and I imagine this is true for you too, with the way you're describing traveling, a lot of the pushback, I think, on getting a full pour is keeping beer a social beverage. So you're going
Yeah,
out, it's not just about the beer, you're having a drink and having a conversation. A lot of the
absolutely.
times I'm either at a brewery by myself or it's my wife and I, and it is about the beer. I want to try,
Yes.
I want to learn about what this brewery is doing. And so being able to bring that down to the tasting experience instead of just a social experience, which obviously beer as a social beverage is awesome, but being able to kind of back up and make that a tasting experience is one of the things I love about flights. And I think we've lost a little bit of that fun, that sense of fun in
Yeah.
craft beer with the challenges of the last few years. And I think we can get a little bit too cool for school, where there's almost this bashfulness around having fun and just being enthusiastic about the beer. Like we're supposed to not care almost.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
Yeah, no, I'm in full agreement. I mean, that's certainly almost all the breweries I've been to have been, alone. There have been plenty where I've gone with friends, visiting or going different places, and obviously my wife and kids have been along to some as well. But yeah, I definitely agree with you that, I do oftentimes I may have conversations with workers or whatever, but I'm primarily there to learn about the beer in the brewery. I'm not there to, go, play cornhole for an hour, or anything like that. So I'm in total agreement with you on that point.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about your process when you go into a brewery. Do you have, unless a brewery specializes in something specific, do you have styles that you tend to seek out to give you a good sense of what a brewery is doing, or what is your typical strategy?
Yeah. So I said, normally at your typical brewery, if they don't give me much to go off of, I like to get a variety of styles, like, a lighter style beer, something dark, some sort of an IPA or pale ale, and then whatever I'm kind of feeling that day. But oftentimes my first question, because one of the sections in my book is called questions to ask, and I describe questions that I like to ask staff or other patrons or brewery owners and why I ask those questions. And the first question I always try to ask, and if it's busy and I'm only going to get one question in, it's going to be, what are your flagships or what do I need to try? Because a lot of times, I mean, I feel like a lot of breweries don't necessarily publicize that, like on their websites and stuff. Like you really have to dig to try to find that kind of information. And so sometimes, the best way to go about that is to ask. And I've been to breweries where the flagship was a very surprising style that I would not have picked out and not have ordered. And that it worked out very well for me because I did ask. So my process certainly starts with asking the questions because I want to know what the brewery is not necessarily most proud of, but what in theory they have the most dialed in, what a majority of their beer drinkers are drinking. Because I've tried to include that. If they have five flagships, I'm not going to get an entire flight of flagships necessarily at all. But it's just good to know that information so that I can pick at least one or two of their staples. And then from there, work across the board, see what other things are kind of jumping out to me. If they have a Czech lager, chances are I'm going to get that in my flight. A big, as of late, the Czech lagers, whether it's pale or dark, have been my personal favorite. But yeah, otherwise it just kind of depends on the day, honestly, and the brewery. Like if there's something, the other thing that will get me to order something is if I've tried so many beers, if I see something that I have not tried before, I'm probably going to get in my flight. There's not many styles at this point that I have not tried, but oftentimes it would be, a unique adjunct in a stout or sour or, something along those lines that I may throw in there. Just for fun. But yeah, at the end of the day, I want to know what the brewery is best at so that I can make sure to give them my best shot during my visit.
You mentioned Czech styles. Do you have other styles that you do tend to gravitate toward, all other things being equal?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm at home, I'm primarily drinking lagers and cream ales. Cream ales, I would say I have an affinity for those as well. The Czech style lagers, but I mean, I love, just a good German Pilsner, Helles lager. I'm also a big fan of Kolsch. So, a lot of the traditional German styles, I would say in general, especially on the lighter end of the spectrum, are kind of more my speed. I love sours for a very long time. I still do love them. But when I got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, a lot of those fruited sours don't do as well with my numbers
Mm.
anymore. So yeah, I mean, predominantly lagers, but I'll throw some other stuff in there. I'm a big fan of peanut butter adjuncts in stouts and porters. IPAs are kind of more down the middle for me, but it just depends on the brewery. Pretty much just anything lager related for me is a good bet.
So we talked about the tasting journals and jotting
Mhm.
things down as you're going through those. What kinds of things are you jotting? Are these just very simple tasting notes? Are you kind of diving in on each beer? What are you keeping track of?
Yeah, it's overall the tasting notes on the beer are pretty simple and straightforward because I'm not going on and like doing like a really big breakdown on the beer because I'm obviously breaking down the beer. I'm at the brewery, but I'm also looking at it at a macro as a brewery as a whole. And so at least half my notes are on the brewery, on the tap room experience. What kind of tap room is it? What is there to do? Two of my, I love asking about, the backstory of the building. Like, is there a history to this building? I love asking about, is there a history behind the name of the brewery? Is there a story about the owner? I'm getting as much as I can. And that's why I like visiting breweries more on downtime. So, weekdays or earlier in the day so that I can ask these questions. Because I like to get that full background as best I can to flesh out my idea of that brewery and kind of combining the whole experience of visiting that brewery with what you are enjoying and what you are drinking at the brewery with the beer. So it's definitely a mix between, talking like writing down about my beers and kind of the notes about my beer and those scores that I'm giving those beers, and then also blending it with all these notes about the brewery itself.
What have been some of the most memorable or unusual tap rooms that you've visited?
I guess I've been to enough of them now that I wouldn't call them unusual, but so my dad is a Lutheran pastor, and he's the reason I'm into craft beer. And so whenever I visited a church brewery, that was always a lot of fun for me. My favorite one was Ministry of Brew in Baltimore in
Mm.
terms of the space. If we're just talking taproom space, Ministry of Brew was probably my favorite. Great Revivalist in Clinton, Iowa is another one. St. Joseph Brewery in Indianapolis. Those are all really, really well done church breweries. I was recently just at a brewery hotel in Mineral Point, Wisconsin, which is a town of like barely 1,000 people, and it's in this building, I think from like the 1850s or 1860s that was built for like the mining boom in the area. Went through many different lives, and now it's a brewery, and the upper two levels are, hotel bed and breakfast,
Mm.
essentially, and it's all one business, which was really cool to see. But yeah, I mean, I actually have in my end of my book on my award winners, which, I do an annual review at the end of each year, give out 20 awards. And I have awards for best taproom interior and most interesting brewery. Another one that I would throw out there, Mars Theater Brewing in North Carolina. They converted a theater.
Mm.
And when I say converted a theater, they basically left it as the theater and then just put in some brewing equipment along one side. Like you go in and where you can sit is actually in the old seats, like looking up at the theater screen. Like it feels
Mm.
like you're just sitting in a regular theater, but it's a brewery. And they have like the food is back at the old snack counter area.
That's
They have
cool.
a balcony. They have the old balcony that you can go sit up in. It's very very cool and unique. It won my best taproom interior just because of how unique it was the
So
year
did
that I
they
visited.
take out any seats and put in like tables in front of those, or what did they do?
I think they put a few in there, and then on the side, like one side has like the brewing equipment, and the other side has kind of like another little sitting area. And then again up top, there's more tables up in the balcony. So yeah, just really really unique atmosphere. I've never been
Yeah.
anywhere else like that.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, there was a long time in craft beer where folks were just putting up a pole barn and filling it with picnic tables, and it was,
Hmm.
about as unaesthetically pleasing as you could get. Obviously, there's a lot of really beautiful tap rooms out there, but I'm curious if you've noticed at any tap rooms the way that they're handling the visitor experience or the atmosphere, the seating experience that is unique or noteworthy. Because I feel like that's something that we're still kind of trying to figure out in the taproom experience of how to give people different spaces and different experiences to maybe not be at a giant long beer hall
Yeah.
table.
So so I have a perfect example for that actually. And it's one that I visited earlier this year, and they are winning my award for best taproom interior this year because, again, it's a very unique structure. It's called Beer in the Barn. It's located in St. Donatus, Iowa, which is essentially an unincorporated community, very, very small. Or if it is incorporated, it's like a couple hundred people. And it is located in the historic Galen Barn, which is the oldest standing barn in the entire state of Iowa. If you know anything about Iowa, there's a lot of barns in Iowa. And so for it to be located inside the oldest standing barn in the state is very, very cool. It's all original limestone. And what makes this space very unique is that it is divided up into multiple different types of spaces. You walk in and there's different stairways to get up to like the main bar area. And the main bar area, pretty typical bar area, I would say, with the bar and, high top tables and everything. But then they have multiple other rooms. They have two different larger spaces. One that has two-story towering ceilings with lots of different tables. One that's much larger, that's all the way upstairs that I think they use for like some event type stuff. And they also have very different places where you kind of like weave through and that are more set against the roof pitch. That are much more, that are smaller with like, two-seat tables with like games that provide essentially the way I'm looking at it, three very distinct experiences, depending on if you want to just go sit, regular bar area, you're sitting in like more of a larger event space if you're with, a group of people, or, if it's just you and somebody else and you want to sit somewhere quieter, they have spaces for that as well. So yeah, that would definitely be a really good example, I feel, of that because they obviously have a structure that kind of enabled them to kind of do this because most of the time, it's a little bit more difficult for breweries to segment up, their space, especially when you consider so many breweries are not very big to begin with. And, when we were our mutual friend, there isn't space in there to divide it up into a multitude of different experiences. You're going in and you can sit outside or you can sit inside. But yeah, so I do agree though that there are breweries that I feel do a better job with that they do have multiple options. I'm trying to think the name. There was just one I went to in Wake Forest, North Carolina. I'm trying to think, and I'm blanking on the name, but there was one that they had it where they had it set up. It was very typical like pub bar type feel in the front, but they had a much larger area in the back. Beer Stout Lager House is another one though that has multiple different experiences. You figure they have their upstairs that has the more open tap room bar feel, but then they also have their huge event, essentially their adult playground downstairs for people that are, looking more for that type of atmosphere. So there are certainly examples of it. But yeah, overall, you do kind of expect to walk into a brewery and, it's one open space. There's a bar, some high tops, maybe some regular tables, and, you're sitting down and maybe there's some board games off to the side, but that's pretty much it.
And the noise is just echoing off every
Oh, yeah.
surface.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, in the back of the book, you've got a number of photos of some of your favorite flight boards. And this is a
Yep.
really fun way that breweries can kind of have fun with their design. Is there one that you would say is like the most creative that you've seen?
We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, my book on pairing craft beer and craft chocolate is available now on Amazon and on the Bean to Barstool shop. Pairing Beer and Chocolate, a guide to bringing the flavors of craft beer and craft chocolate together, is out now. This paperback book explains the process of pairing beer and chocolate, includes a guide to hosting a pairing at home, walks through dozens of beer styles to provide style-by-style pairing guidance, and gives room for taking your own pairing notes along the way. This is the only book on pairing beer and chocolate available. Grab your copy now at the link in the show notes or on Amazon. If you manage a tap room, bookstore, chocolate shop, or cafe and want to stock the book, get in touch about our easy wholesale process. Beer and chocolate belong together, and this book is your guide to getting the most out of every pairing.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's definitely a few. I would have said prior to visiting, so I've been to two that use a skateboard. One, and the first time that I used was in Tucson, Arizona at Crooked Tooth, and I was like, "Oh, this is so cool." Obviously, they have fixed the wheels so that way it wasn't going to roll off. Because especially if you're on your, if you're with people and you've been drinking a while, and and you're, got more than one flight, it's like, oh my goodness, my beer's rolling away. I really like that one. I'm a big fan. I mean, they're not necessarily unique, but I love when they are shaped like the state. I've had The one of the ones I really liked was at Octopi Brewing here in
Mm.
Wisconsin. It was shaped like a curled up octopus tentacle. Another one here in Wisconsin as a diehard Packer fan, Cheesehead Brewing, and it's shaped like a cheesehead. Lone Pine Brewing in Portland, Maine used a ski. Jailbreak Brewing in Maryland used a key shaped one, and it was like kind of like a metal thing, and it was very skinny. It's one of the more unique shaped boards, I would say,
Hmm.
that I've seen. I also really liked now closed Mockery Brewing in Denver, and they fused together like two different. They used license plates, Colorado license
Oh,
plates,
that's cool.
and cut holes in it. And I really like that one as well. So there's a lot more in the book, both in terms of the listing and in the pictures of all the different cool flight boards around the country. And yeah, I mean that like I said again, that's the title of the book. It's what I love to drink, and so obviously finding unique ones was part of the fun of
Yeah,
that.
for sure. Yeah. So beyond just trying a lot of fantastic beers, what are some of the more memorable experiences you've had along the way in your beer travels?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of it revolves around people, of course. In particular, my dad, my favorite. The one time that I have done a true beercation where I planned a trip for multiple days and the sole objective essentially was to visit breweries, was with him in 2021. We went to Austin, Texas for 3 nights. We had 2 half days and 2 full days, and we visited 27 breweries.
Wow.
And we also did stuff around Austin. We also drove down to San Antonio and, did some other touristy stuff in the morning and everything. Um, but that was so much fun. I've had a lot of memorable milestone visits. Bierstadt, getting the tour there was awesome for my 1000th visit. My 500th was at Central Waters here in Wisconsin, and they rolled out the red carpet for me and gave me the whole background tour, including their huge barrel facility. Dissolver in Asheville was my 800th, and they also, I mean, they even made me my own sign. That they used
Nice.
their graphic design guide made me. And I would say, hitting the 50th, getting to my first brewery in Alaska for my 50th state. My dad was there for that as well, which was really cool. A lot of the beer festivals have been awesome. JBF, Great Taste of the Midwest. And just getting to meet up. I've made a lot of friends via mostly beer Twitter, but also, on beer Instagram. And the first time I'm able to meet up with them at breweries is really rewarding. For instance, me and you meeting up at our mutual friend.
Mhm.
I've met up with friends in Seattle, San Diego, St. Louis, Asheville, Cincinnati, um, Baltimore. Like I've been able to meet up with so many people around Austin, another one. So many people I've been able to meet up with at breweries, and that has been really cool because you forge these friendships online, talking about something that you're both passionate about, and then when you get to enjoy that thing together, that is incredibly rewarding as well.
Yeah, for sure. You don't assume you're ever going to get to meet these people. Like
Yeah.
the basis of the relationship is online, and then
hmm
it's so cool when you finally get to. So is your house pretty much filled with beer paraphernalia now?
In the basement, yes, that is I have my own little area. I have a map that has pin because we have a pin map for our family travels, but then I also have my own pin map in the basement that has a pin for every single small town and city that I've been to a brewery in. I have a chalkboard top 10 list that I update with my top 10 states that I've been to the most breweries in. I made a map that I put logos in each state for breweries I visited. I made my own bar as well. I used spent wine barrels from a local brewery here, 1840 Brewing, and
Oh,
I made
sure.
a bar. I do have a large corner cabinet with glassware. So yeah, I definitely have my fair share of beer stuff, and my entire wardrobe is essentially, I have some sports stuff still, but I pretty much only wear brewery shirts and sweatshirts and hats at this point.
Yeah.
I have plenty of those as well.
Yeah. We've all had the moment of like looking down and realizing we're wearing three different breweries,
Yeah.
t-shirt,
I was
hoodie,
doing
and
that. Yeah,
hat.
I've got 49th State from Alaska on right now for my sweatshirt. I've got Pals Brewing from Nebraska. That was another one that was a milestone visit that was awesome. And I had my Eagle Park hat on earlier today when I was out because it's cold and snowy today. So
Sure.
I'm often wearing three different brewery merches
Yeah.
on most days.
So, with so many breweries you've been to, and obviously thousands and thousands of beers you tasted, beyond keeping track of these in your notes, how do you notice yourself remembering these beers? Do you spontaneously remember that beer at that place? When you're looking back for your year
Yeah.
end awards or anything like that?
I have a pretty good, not every single beer, but the good ones for sure. And unfortunately, the very, very bad ones that occasionally come up. But yeah, whenever I look at a name of a brewery on my spreadsheet, I can remember that brewery, and kind of part of my experiences there. And the notes certainly, help when it comes time with trying to remember some of the beers. But I also, for my annual review, I keep an open Google Doc throughout the year that I update. And so after, at the beginning of the year, I'm going to start it fresh. I won't be visiting as many breweries, but I still like to do it. And especially when we were traveling and, I was getting to over 200 brews in a year, I would have the Google Doc and I would keep a running tally. So once I got to five, if I got to another one that I wanted to include in there, I had to go back and take one out for the nominees. So that certainly helped. But yeah, I mean, the very, very good ones, it's always very memorable. Like the Chuckanut Kolsch.
Mm.
I just had in Anchorage, Alaska. I had all seen their hand-picked Alaskan blueberry sour that was one of the best beers I think I've ever had. There are instances of I had a really good peanut butter milk stout in San Diego at Bear Cookie. There are certain beers that certainly stuck with me. But yeah, it can be difficult to remember every single beer because like I said, a lot of these average run-of-the-mill breweries, I'm not going to remember exactly how every single beer tasted. It's just not
Mm.
possible. That's why I try to take my notes and share them as soon as I can so that I have that fresher memory. But, it doesn't make them any less important, I guess, in my beer journey. I've appreciated every opportunity that I've had to check out a new place. But yeah, certainly, there are ones that just, the good ones and the very, very good ones, if they're those 20 to 30 beers that were truly
Yeah.
top notch, I can certainly have very good memories of those.
One thing I found is interesting for me, especially if I'm on a beer trip that is going to have a large volume of beers, like say I'm
Hmm.
covering GABF for a
Yeah.
publication or something like that. There's the list that I make as soon as I'm done, maybe even for an article I'm writing that is, here were the top whatever beers. And then 6 months or a year later, I'll find that a few of those have stuck in my memory. And it's not necessarily the ones that I would have singled out as the top three or something if I
Yeah.
were making that list in the moment. But for some reason, one or another has just really kind of wormed its way into my sensory memory. And I can't always really identify exactly why that happens.
Well, for me with my traveling and the way that I observe the breweries and the tap room, that it's also possible that when I'm at a really unique experience and a really unique tap room, a really cool tap room, that because that brewery as a whole is more memorable, it makes the beer more memorable as well in
Mm-hmm.
some ways. So I think that is another factor for sure, is based on your whole experience. Because obviously those top 1% beers are going to be phenomenal no matter what. But then kind of a step down if you're in like I said, in a really cool church, or if you're in, a really unique bank that, has all sorts of history, they may be easier to remember that trip more than one of half a dozen in a business park that you visited. So
Sure.
that, that
Yeah.
that would be something else too.
Yeah. Well, where's next from here? I know you said you won't be able to travel quite as much, but I'm sure you're already rolling through what your
Yeah.
next options are. So where do you still want to go?
Well, we're after the holidays, we're going out to visit family in San Diego, and I'm actually hosting a book event out there, which is really exciting. And then we're going to be up. My wife wants to take the kids to Disney, and that's going to be quite something. We'll say we've been to Disney World a couple times. The kids have not been to Disneyland, but I'm going to get to two breweries that are very high on my bucket list. The night before, Green Cheek and Everywhere out there in Orange, California, and then we'll be up in the Bay Area. Might get to a couple more up there. The big trip that we're hoping to do either this summer or maybe a little bit further in the future, but soon, is returning to New England. That was the first place that my wife and I lived when we started traveling. We lived in Maine and New Hampshire in 2017, so we have not been back since then. And the Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine are the final five states that my kids need to visit to be 50 staters. So we'd like to go and do that trip at some point. And obviously, there's a whole mess of breweries up there that have opened since 2017 that I would really love to check out. I never got to Treehouse when we were out there. That's obviously the big one, as well as Bellflower in Portland. So I'd say that would be the next hopeful big trip, is doing that. And I'm sure I'm going to visit more around the Twin Cities, where my parents live, down in Chicago, kind of around some other Midwestern areas, hopefully. But yeah, that's the hope. Like I said, hopefully it's going to be a big trip out to New England too, whenever we do that.
Do you have much aspiration for international beer travel?
Eventually, yes. My wife and I do really want to go abroad, and that is certainly in the cards. We'd like for our kids to be a little bit older, though. Right now, they've obviously traveled a ton, more well traveled than just about every child out there. Going abroad in terms of the cost and the
Yeah,
time and everything, we'd like them to be a little bit older than 6 and 3 before we do that. So, that time will certainly come. We're excited for that time to come. And, once we are older, 2 kids out of the house, I'm sure we'll be doing even more of that, hopefully, because there's plenty of countries obviously that are on my wish now that we've kind of covered the United States.
that's awesome. The last question I usually ask when I'm interviewing a brewer or a chocolate maker is, what story are you telling with whatever it is you're making,
hmm
beer, chocolate, whatever? Obviously, it's a little different with you, but what story do you feel like you're telling by chronicling all these different tasting experiences at different breweries?
Yeah, I'm not telling my own story. I guess I am in some ways, my own journey to all these breweries, but my goal behind it was sharing the stories of all these breweries and giving little snippets into them. It's obviously not possible with over 1,000 breweries in the book to, do a super deep dive into every single one. But I love providing little tidbits of information and showing how all these breweries compose the craft beer scenes around the country. And with social media, that was the whole point, was to share my experiences and share the stories of these breweries, because they're each, their fingerprints, they're unique. Even the most, on the surface, maybe a bland brewery, there still is very likely to be an interesting story about the owner or the brewer, or why they brew certain beers. And so I'm trying to share those stories while blending it with my own journey in craft beer, because obviously I have grown and adapted as a beer drinker since I first visited a brewery, almost a decade ago now. So, that has certainly been part of what I'm trying to feature in the book. But yeah, I guess that would be my answer, though, is that while it's my own personal story, it's more about me experiencing the stories of others, and the stories of these breweries.
You can find links to Joel's Instagram account and info on flights across America in the show notes. I encourage you to pick up a copy and use it to plan your next brewery visit or beer trip. If you work in beer or you're just a beer enthusiast, don't lose heart. I say that to myself as much as anyone else. Things seem grim out there, but there is still so much fun to explore and experience in the world of beer. Go support your favorite breweries. Thanks so much to Joel for coming on the show today, and to all of you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bean to Barstool.